One thing I learned is that there's no rule when it comes to mentors. You can have multiple, and different mentors work for different stages of your career. And sometimes it's good to actually have a subject matter expert mentor, and other times it's better to have a coach. I was always a person that was working the hardest and working the longest and showing up first and being the last one to leave. And that's great. However, if no one knows who you are and you're not known for anything else but being the hard worker, are you top of mind when they're making decisions about advancement?
Hi, I'm your host Chris Matthews, and you're listening to the Mentor Collective podcast. Conversations that resonate, stories that inspire. In each episode, I'm joined by a guest. We explore their personal stories, the challenges and triumphs which have shaped them, and the invaluable lessons learned along the way. Join us as we navigate through 4 key themes: career journey and reflections, personal and holistic approach, leadership and values, and finally, mentorship, guiding and being guided. In each theme, we traverse the past, present, and future, unraveling the unique narratives of our guests. Welcome to the Mentor Collective podcast. Thank you so much, Tas, for joining me on the Mentor Collective podcast. It's so lovely to have you. I wondered if you could kick us off by giving an introduction to yourself, please.
Sure, Chris. First of all, thank you for having me. It's so nice to actually be able to have this chat with you. So for those who don't know me like you do, Chris, my name's Tas Hirani, and I'm based in Manchester in the UK. I've been working in global roles for many years, actually. Probably back in 2015, I started working into global roles, and I've been in the SaaS space in software companies since that time. Primarily in the field service space sector. So things like ServiceMax companies we've worked at together, Chris. I've worked at Click Software, also for Salesforce in their Service Cloud and field service areas. And I work for an AI SaaS company right now that specializes in this space too. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm also a mum of 2. With 2 humans and 2 furries, which are my dogs, but also I call them my fur babies. And, proud wife of an amazing personal trainer who is my husband.
Does he give you any training tips, or is that banned?
He tries to give me training tips. However, with anything that your significant other says, if somebody else says it, it's incredibly relevant. And when he says it, I just seem to ignore it. And I don't understand the psychology behind that. So let's not go there.
So you spent a lot of time dealing with a lot of people around the world, which is, it sounds like a majority of your career, which is a lovely and unique thing. So I'm definitely hoping we can tap into that a little bit later on. This next theme is called Career Journey and Reflections. So the first question I ask everyone on this one is, how did your journey begin in your industry, and what led you to where you are today?
I'm very fortunate that I do feel that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be in my career right now, and that's really built up off the journey of where I've come from. I ended up where I am today through having spent a really long time in my career at GE. I spent 7.5, nearly 8 years at GE, and had got really comfortable there, working in a hybrid sales and moving into a sales enablement role there. And during the time that I was there, the GE Capital businesses of where I was based started to wind up. And that gave me an option of moving into another GE business, or actually doing something completely different. I made the choice then, at that stage in my career, to do something very different. And that's when I moved into a much smaller organization in the SaaS space. And that's where my field service industry side of my career really began. Continuing on my sales pathway in terms of that core skill set, but actually that catapulted me into a much more exciting, dynamic, small company where when you come from a large corporate, feeling that sense of speed, pace, excitement, fun, the energy that comes with that is incredibly addictive. And that led me into staying in those smaller companies and understanding that that is my sweet spot. Primarily from a skill point of view, where I am today, I joined the company that I'm currently in to lead sales enablement, and that then widened out into revenue operations and enablement. And that's happened because I have a combination in terms of where I started really was in sales operations and metrics and driving sales and understanding what is the ROI per sales rep, and using my analytical skills to also then understand where are the blockers for salespeople. Are they struggling more in the initial stages? Are they getting stuck in negotiation? And then starting to develop training curricula around that. And also taking on things around the CRM system, and how we can build just-in-time enablement in there. And I think those experiences throughout my career helped me understand, having been in the seat myself, how you want to be served. And that led me to a very different approach when it came to operations around sales and metrics and driving excellence, because I had that perspective, I would say. But also when it came to the enablement, for many of us, we perceive training as being almost like a punishment and a chore. It's something that you have to do for compliance. And I always wanted to have a twist on that and to make it fun, engaging, and for people to get something out of it and to feel the freedom that if they're not getting something out of it or it's stale, that they could tell me that so that I could make it better. And that's really been the common thread through my journey across the different pathways that I've gone through. And I have dipped back into sales and then dipped back into enablement. And I think it's the addiction of being out in the field and in front of customers and having relevant experiences. And that has always added to my ability to curate enablement and metrics that are relevant, realistic, and actually meaningful, I think. And that's why I started off with, I believe I am where I'm supposed to be right now because of that journey that I've been on.
What I really loved is your realization of a different perspective and how you applied that to where you are. So you were talking about that you had, you can see from the client side what they're expecting, and that has informed the way that you enable and you perform your role. Were there any kind of particular bombshell type of moments or big moments where you're like, oh, wow, we're doing this completely wrong? Or in general, maybe what you've seen across your colleagues or past experiences, all of that could have been done slightly differently or entirely differently. Were there any kind of big moments like that?
Oh, absolutely. There was a real aha moment for me that culture can play a really significant role when it comes to enablement, and breaking that down into what do I really mean by that. I mean that it's quite often the case that your enablement person becomes like the Yoda, like the directory, and you just ask them where things are and how to do things. And what I realized is that if you develop a really great coaching culture within your sales team where everybody's out to help each other and there's a sense of team, and you create an environment where people can genuinely share what their deal blockers are and you can all swarm on that, then you multiply enablement into every individual within the team. And that is when you drive a winning culture. That's the USP. It's not actually having a great enablement person. I think it's the job of the enablement person to drive that through the DNA of the team, alongside and with the support of leadership. And I think that is the real aha for me in my career on how you make a difference.
And you mentioned a little bit about how you were working in GE, which was giant, and then you moved to the smaller companies, which are a lot more nimble. And it seems like you have a big preference towards being in a smaller company and having that more nimble and agile approach, we might call it. I wondered, So we heard some of the maybe negatives. Were there any kind of positives for you working in a larger organization that you maybe miss about being in a smaller organization?
Absolutely. The thing for me with the larger organizations, they have much more opportunities around philanthropy. They're much more supportive around training and investment and personal development with leadership programs. The networking opportunities are immense, and being a people person, that's something that you take for granted when you're in really large companies, that you have a huge collective of people from incredibly diverse backgrounds that have lots of points of view around projects and ways that you can be successful in tackling things. And those things you do miss when you go into a smaller organization where the focus is much more on getting things done and having an impact, and your lack of delivery is much more felt and pronounced. Whereas in a larger company, if you take your foot off the gas pedal somewhat for a moment to actually spend a bit of time on you and your personal development, it's not felt so acutely by the rest of the team. And I think those things, it's much more challenging for smaller businesses to have the same impact in terms of philanthropy as the bigger ones. And having the time and the space to dedicate to doing those things need to be a conscious effort in smaller organizations, whereas they become part of the DNA for every individual in larger ones. So those are some of the things that I have felt and miss. But do I feel like it was worth trading? Yeah, I do.
Do you feel like it's the bigger organizations have, because what I'm hearing you saying is that it's almost like a capacity problem, and a smaller team doing more directly driving where the business is going and the direction of the business, as opposed to a really, really large team. Did you get the sense when you were it doesn't have to be just GE, but the larger organizations, did you ever get the sense that people were more compassionate in a larger organization, or is it just frankly the time and the availability?
It's difficult to answer that, actually, honestly. I've worked at Salesforce, which was very large, as well as GE, and the culture in GE and Salesforce is very different. And the approach to what made somebody successful and what the core values are for individual and advancement, measurement and output, those qualities were different in those organizations. So I feel that to give you a fair response as to why, I think you do have less capacity in smaller organizations, but it's also the leadership thread in terms of what's perceived to be what good looks like and what we're striving for, and getting everybody on that same mission. It's much more challenging in the bigger organizations. And so there's much more rigor and measure and scrutiny into developing systems around those things, whereas those are much more relaxed in smaller organizations because there's greater visibility. And so I feel like many people do say there's a lot less red tape, and there is, and it's because it's not necessary. And that gives you a sense of freedom without obviously giving you license to misbehave. So treat the word freedom in a sense of, I can just get on with the core of what I need to get done without needing to focus on if I'm going about it the right way, because it's in line with the central mission. Because in smaller teams, you have a very clear sense of what we're trying to achieve. The company goals are much more transparent, and the access to leadership for you to get that clarification and know if you're in line with what the core direction is, it's just easier.
Has there ever been, and could you then share, a story of when a mentor has had a lasting impact on your personal, professional development? It might be just like a one-time like throwaway thing that really stuck with you, or it might be a kind of ongoing, longer-term kind of shaping. Do you have any stories like that?
So I've got two examples for you. One that's directly a mentor, and actually one that's more of an inspirational speaker that actually ticked that box of being inspirational for me. Young in my career, I was lucky enough to actually see Chris Akabusi, who was a sprinter for much of his career, talk about his transition from sport into business and what his core attributes were. And they have stuck with me for more than 20 years in complete clarity, purely because of the way in which he articulated it. And he talked about three things about when he was getting ready to sprint for just mere seconds, about how he would enter that arena with pride, passion, and a can-do attitude. And those three things have really defined how I execute in my personal and professional life, is just to do everything in a way that I can reflect back on and be proud of, to approach anything and everything with a can-do attitude, whether it's being a mum or handling a kickoff in a new company when I'd only been there for 6 weeks, and really thinking about actually just infusing my natural passion because I want to be there and I want to show up. And I think that inspirational speaker for me was just at the right moment for me, at the right time, and the way he delivered it just incredibly resonated with me for such a long time that it just sticks with me on a daily basis. And it's because it was simple, straightforward, and easy to apply. So I think that for me was one big influence in terms of attitude and how people perceive me that I think has stuck with me for a very long time. And the second one for me was someone who I was very fortunate enough to have as both a mentor and for a short period of time a leader as I transitioned from sales into sales enablement and sales operations. And she taught me in large businesses what the power of brand can really bring for you personally in terms of your advancement. I was always very execution oriented, always the person that was working the hardest and working the longest and showing up first and being the last one to leave. And that's great. However, if no one knows who you are and you're not known for anything else but being the hard worker, are you top of mind when they're making decisions about advancement, if that's what you're after? And she helped me really understand and unlocked that part of my mind around what are you known for and how are you being perceived and who are your board of advisors, who makes those decisions, and if you're focused on career, how you need to understand the bigger picture in bigger organizations on. And I think that for me carried forward also for me in many situations. It's not just about who are your board of advisors or key stakeholders when it comes to a career, but it's also when you think about your personal life, who are those people that give you energy, that are important in terms of where you recharge, that you find resonate with your personal values, that you find dependable or approachable, or where you feel safe. And I think it was interesting for me learning from her. I felt like I matured a lot from learning from her. And she went on actually to leave and set up her own business, just focusing on helping people devise and unleash their brand. So she was a great mentor for me.
What a lucky thing, eh? To sort of come across that person and to have them influence you so strongly. Do you feel that, how transferable would you say, because this is coming from a place of similarly having worked in larger organizations. I think you've worked in more larger organizations than I have, but certainly where I saw the most advancement in my career in that large organization was the sort of the age-old thing of it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I guess you could add a little bit to what you're saying here by it's not just being a high performer, you also need to balance that by being connected and be seen to be doing well right? Even in a genuine and a non-climber way as well, right? Like you need to really be not only a hard worker, but you need to be giving and passionate and all this great stuff. I guess when you moved out of those larger organizations and into the smaller organizations, how do you kind of repurpose your personal brand? Do you think it's as important to have a personal brand in a smaller organization than a larger one? Or do you think actually smaller organizations, everyone knows what everyone's doing anyway, so you don't need to focus so much on the brand? What would you say to that?
I think it's actually more important in smaller organizations for people to be able to very clearly articulate what you're known for. The reason I think about this differently in smaller organizations are, in large ones, you have people who climb the ladder and burn the ladder. So they tread on the people beneath them to get there. And then you have ones in smaller organizations where you just can't operate like that because it's just not perceived very well, and it's way more transparent. It's so much more obvious in smaller organizations. So you do not get that type of person. And as small organizations kind of grow and people join those organizations who I would call those ladder burners, you do still get them in those smaller spaces. I've unfortunately and fortunately learned through working for numerous people like that, where I have been a stepping stone on their way and part of the burnt ladder. And we've all been there where you feel that and you know that somebody potentially has leveraged your input to actually get themselves further up the ladder at your expense. So I would say that people aren't known for that as part of their brand in larger organizations because it's not so visible. In smaller organizations, you can get burnt by burning ladders yourself. And it's not easy to do that without leadership knowing that that is what you do and how you go about it. It's very transparent. However, the core of that, coming back to brand, is if your brand isn't succinctly summarized by individuals in in a smaller company, then you just become part of the general melee, if for want of a better phrase. If you're not a burning bright star in any size C, then really it's not clear that you actually understand what you yourself stand for.
Thank you so much for that really thoughtful response to that question. And I thought for sure with my lead-in, I was on the right track. And thank you so much for providing the different perspective. It's great. The one thing that particularly upsets me in work are the people who climb the ladder and burn the ladder. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking, gosh, I still think of times that happened years ago, where that happened to me. And I struggle to get around them, and it still comes back and it evokes some sort of emotional response in me. So I think that kind of starts to lead us nicely into the second theme, which is personal and holistic approach. One of the things that I most admired when you and I worked not in the same group together, but we were at least in the same company and we kind of saw each other working. What I really admired about you is your motivation when you were going through a challenging time, and whether that's client-based, internal-based, or wherever that challenge came from, you seemed to have this kind of momentum about you. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how you stay motivated, even if it doesn't always work, but how you try at least to stay motivated in challenging times.
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't realise for a very long time that I had this perception from people. And I've heard it a lot during my career that, Tas, you have this energy. And it's interesting you talk about it because I find work energizing. I genuinely do enjoy what I do. If you ask me, what about my job don't I like? I would struggle to articulate an answer. I do sometimes have moments where I wish I could fast forward because I know I have a mountain to climb in terms of volume, but there aren't things within that volume that I don't want to do. And so I've made my own bed, so I've got to lie in it because I'm doing all the cool things that I want to do. But back to the heart of your question, even when you're in a burning ladder, how do I stay motivated? It's because I have a really strong belief that regardless of how you're being treated, I would like people to treat me in the way that I would treat other people. And so when I'm approaching situations, I'm putting my best foot forward because that's how I would wish people would treat me, whether that's a customer, whether that's a colleague, whether that's anybody that I'm interacting with, whether it's just the person that opens the front door. I'm going to greet them with a smile because that's how I would want them to greet me in every interaction. And so when you're dealing with situations, regardless of whatever personal baggage or professional baggage, it's about presenting the best you in that situation and having no regrets. So for me, I wish people had given me more feedback during my developmental phases earlier on in my career. And so one thing that I do is I give feedback regularly and often, even when it's not solicited, because I wish that people were more transparent with what I'm doing well and what I'm not doing well. And I think it's that energy that you're talking about, Chris, that being real and being authentic and being human, even in professional contexts, I think that's the source of the energy.
Yeah, I love it. And it's authenticity is something that really comes through in a lot of these discussions I've been having with people for this podcast. And I think it ties in really nicely with you and what you said about not having regrets. And actually, I was thinking about how it's almost like what you are doing in your daily life, even if you don't actively think it, is that you're not making space for regrets, because you're going at it authentically, your authentic self. If it goes wrong, it goes wrong, and you know that you tried everything that you could do to make it right because you have that thread of authenticity through what you do. I loved what you said about present the best you. I did also want to pick you up on something you just said, which was you said something along the lines of, if I've got a large volume of work, or if there's a volume of work, I sometimes want to press the fast forward button. And that you probably don't realize is quite a unique way of looking at a mountain of work, because I think there's a lot of people out there, myself included, I sometimes find myself in this trap where you see that volume of work, but it's not, in quotes, a volume of work. It is a mountain of where do I even begin? How has this all come to me? I have got to all do all this. I've got to work through all this, and it's all got to be perfect. And and I think a lot of people, when they see a lot of work, that is, I am too busy. I am overwhelmed. I am this. I am that. And I know you're human like everyone else. I'm sure you have feelings of overwhelm. But I wanted to just come back to it because the way that you phrased it made it sound so much more manageable. So I wondered, when you talk about the volume of work, like, do you get those feelings of overwhelm like most people do? Or are you in a place where you can approach things in a methodical way? Like, what's the secret there, if you have a secret, to perceiving it as volume, not as overwhelm?
It's interesting. I have people who I work with and who work for me that say that I just get through things so much quicker than everyone else. And I don't think it is quicker. I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't allow myself to procrastinate. I simply imagine it as if it was a stack of papers that have just been flung around on my desk at random. And I feel like without taking too much and over-engineering it, simply stack it and then start having at it. And just being very simple with it and working through those things and applying a very simple, straightforward, non-time consuming, what absolutely must get done, and thinking about what's going to add the most value to the business if I do which one. And staying very true to the very simple goals and just always thinking about it in very simple terms. Because the thing that we quite often do is start to in our heads start thinking about, wow, there's too much here. Now I need to go and ask for help. And then you go and spend time asking for help, or ask for help in prioritizing. And what you're actually doing is procrastinating and putting it off. And I just remove that procrastination and remove that thinking time and just dive in. And it's always actually worked really well for me, because there are times when you still are up late at night thinking about, oh my, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to get through this? And then it's going to happen. And I'm going to still get to whatever day of the week it is. And either it's going to get done and it's not get done. And I've said this so many times to people, no volcano will erupt as a result of me not having got through all those things. And so I'm just going to do the best I can. And if something gets missed, then I've got to hold my hands up because I'm human. And that's how I get through it. It's just have a go, just have at it like a Rottweiler. Just get in there, just get it done. And it's more often than not, it's kind of, you build it up in your mind to be a bigger thing than it is. And then you start putting it off, and then it's taking longer, and you're trying to do everything else other than the thing. And so just make space and just get on with it. It sounds a little bit aggressive, and there's not anything really special or scientific about it. Then just do it.
Well, that's, I think a lot of people, when they get into situations like that, they see the mountain, they don't know how to chip away at it. And the ask for help is like a kind of cry for help rather than an ask necessarily. And you're reminding me of a guy I used to work with. He got things done, but he was so relaxed about everything. You could almost imagine that he didn't care about anything that he was doing. He did care, but he didn't, similar to what you're saying. I think you're a different angle into that same thing, right? Because really what we're talking about is the perception of threat. And some people might perceive not doing something by a certain time as a very real, significant threat. Either that threatens their job or their life even. They might not really be able to separate that feeling that you might get when like a car is coming towards you, or you see someone that might threaten you in the street, versus, oh, I've got a deadline for this thing tomorrow, and if I don't meet that deadline, their head is telling them, or their hormones or emotions are telling them, that is a serious threat to you. And what I really love, and it kind of comes back to your Chris Akabusi quote, I think, which almost runs through you, which is just that pride piece. And again, it all ties in with authenticity and being confident in what you're doing, and that can-do attitude. So I really like that we started at that, because it is coming out. I think what that demonstrates, and what I love so far about this conversation, is that those three words are coming out in what you do, even though you aren't necessarily aiming proactively to be that way. It is just embedded in you. What a wonderful thing to have moved you as much as it did. And I wonder, so you love work, or you love your work, you love what you do. Maybe that's a fairer thing to say. So you have a couple of kids and you have a husband. I think that was the order in which we prioritize them in your summary. I wonder how you balance being that can do, get stuff done, plow through the volume. How do you balance that with your personal commitments in your personal life? Do you feel like you've got that balanced, or do you feel like there's more work to do there?
It's incredibly difficult, actually, to have that balance. I'm fortunate enough to work from home in a global role, so I can pick and choose the hours that I work, and most of the time I work until around 7 or 8 p.m, which sounds ludicrous to many people, but for me that works, because I have the mornings to really focus on work that needs high intensity, high levels of concentration. I'll take time in the middle of the day to step away completely. I'll go work out, I'll eat some lunch, and I take a really long break, sometimes an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours if I've started at 9 in the morning. And then I'll have at it in the afternoon, mostly through forced productivity, because those are meetings, connections, discussions. And so I feel that I have that good balance of dedicated time to progress things, time for myself, and then time to actually meet with people. And then when I switch off and put the laptop down, I 100% step away, and it's all about the people around me and being present and actually connecting with them in a meaningful way. So I do spend every single day one-on-one time with my husband, where we go for a walk with the dogs once or twice a day, and we connect one-on-one and talk about all the things, good, bad and ugly, all the usual things that couples talk about. And for me, in the evening, I'll also connect with my kids. Depends on when they're around, and it's easy for me to actually fit in one-on-one time with either both of them one-on-one, or all three of us, all four of us together, even as a family. So it just happens organically, and I think it's really around being present. So when you're at work and you're in work mode. And when I step away in the evenings, I feel like I have enough time for those humans. And working from home, it means that I don't have to spend that time commuting and traveling. And when that does happen, then I'm 100% away. And when I'm away, I'm just in that work mode. And when I'm at home, I'm so much more available and not so exhausted when I get to the weekend, because I haven't had to do lots of commuting and traveling. So I find that the balance works for me where I am right now.
And I think what you're expressing here is not as common out there as maybe we think, you know. And the reason why I say that is because you clearly have a sense of purpose and a drive, and you also have either acquired or been given or learnt a sense of autonomy, and what kind of way of working makes you the most productive, I guess. And that is something that I don't see a lot of out there. You know, there's not a lot of people that can say, this is how I work, this is what will get the best of me, my deliverables will be delivered, and my schedule will be my schedule, kind of thing. And I know that you're a very collaborative person, and you're not kind of booting anyone out with that. But I wondered if you could just share sort of briefly about where you think that sort of sense of autonomy came from. Like, was that earned? Is it learned? Is it the role you're at right now, the level of seniority that grants you that? Or do you think that someone, you know, relatively starting their career, somewhere in the middle of their career that may not have a high level of seniority could similarly start taking that approach? Because I would love to see more of this autonomous, because we're moving that way anyway, right? We're moving towards more flexible working, especially in IT. There's an appreciation that people have personal either commitments or ways of working that better suit them. So I guess the question is, where do you feel that came from for you? Was it kind of like a light switch? Was it gradual? Is it permitted, or is it more enforced from your perspective? What do you think?
I think for me, this happened when, during my time at GE, I was in a very traditional setup. I went into the office every day, and I would drop my kids off at a preschool club, go to work and pick them up from an after school club. And I felt like they were having the longest school day because I had an incredibly long working day. I spoke to my leader at the time around actually doing some flexible working so that I could actually drop my kids off, be at the office for 9, leave at 3, pick my kids up, spend time with my kids in the evening, and then log back in for a couple of hours once they've gone to bed, because they were young and they were in bed by 7:30, and most days 7 p.m. So I could be back on at 7:30 and make up the rest of my hours by doing an hour or an hour and a half, depending on the day of the week, in the evening. And strangely, I found that I was much, much more productive in that final hour when nobody was trying to have a conversation with me at the same time as I was at my desk. I didn't need to walk to the coffee machine and get interrupted by people and find that I spent 20 minutes there where I didn't want to spend 20 minutes or weren't intending to spend 20 minutes. And that because I had that hour, I felt like I was getting 2 hours of work done in that power hour. and I would have an hour and a half or 2 hours worth of work, and I was just breezing through it. And sometimes that would be creating a deck for a customer meeting I had coming up. And normally, if I was in the office, that would take me half a day, because people walk past and say hi, or your manager at the desk adjacent, or your colleague says something to you. It's not continuous work or focused work. You are being interrupted, and that takes you out of a concentration zone. And when you're doing that without interruption, it's just much, much more effective. And then I learned that actually building these power hours into my working routine was going to make me more effective and create this perception that I was doing things more quickly. And it was actually not really that I was doing them more quickly. I was just doing them in focus time without interruptions. So instead of dedicating half a day to doing something, I know that my most productive time is in the morning. Because I work in a global role, there are fewer people who are needing support and engagement in that time period, and that's when I have my optimum concentration. And so between 9 and 11 is when the magic happens for me. And so I devised a way that it would be okay for me to do my 9 to 11 most days and still actually have time for me, still have time to walk my dogs, still have time for my husband and my family, and still be really effective at work. And it, to kind of really nail it, it's about being comfortable communicating. That's how I work most effectively. And I do feel empowered enough to have that conversation. And when I've approached people and I find it easy as part of my introduction to say, I am based in the UK and you can find me online at these times. And if you need me in the morning, quite often you might find a delay in my response because I could be on focused work. And it's just part of my natural dialogue, and people accept it. I think it's much more the norm now for people to be able to communicate how they like to be interacted with. Not so much so 10, 15 years ago.
What strikes me from what you're saying, which I love, by the way, is a message of empowerment, of kind of knowledge and tried and tested. Like it's not like you went in and you were like, right, I want to have long lunches every day, and I want to, here's all my personal requirements, and I'm going to make them fit into my work schedule. You've actually gone, okay, what do I need to do my job, and how and when will I do that best? And it has opened up the door for you for your personal commitments. And I also really love, and I didn't mention it when you first said it, but I really loved you talking about really shutting off at the end of the day, or at the end of your work, or in between your availability windows, whatever we want to call it, which is for sure, and almost a bit cliched now to say that it's one of the biggest problems for sure. And I think in IT and the sort of industries that we work in, the always connected thing is a burgeoning problem. But we do need to move on. We need to move on, otherwise we're going to run out of time.
I could go forever and a day about really switching off. That's a whole podcast.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you for the idea. It's coming. It's coming. Let's move on to the third theme, which is leadership and values. So I wanted to really call back to one question actually that I had planned for you today, which really makes a lot of sense given what you've spoken about a bit earlier, which is about culture and fostering a good culture. So from your perspective and from what you do, how do you feel you foster a culture of collaboration and also innovation within your team and organization?
Simply put, I am very humble in my approach. I'm not professing to be the expert on anything, and demonstrating curiosity and genuinely actively listening to my colleagues, I think has really helped drive the ability to approach things like a think tank as a group. I think that's really the secret sauce. It's about approach, and there are times and moments when you do need to come across as the all-knowing, all-seeing, having done this before. And there are times when really it comes down to culture. It's the simple curiosity and really wanting to actually understand what drives your team and what can genuinely help them. And that is what has really fostered that sense of innovation within the team that I'm in today. We approach and solve problems together as a team. We do always get the buy-in and approval from leadership. However, it's the collective minds that are much more powerful than any single person's thought. And then we have a natural sense of, let's talk about it, let's understand what's going on, let's share, let's collaborate. And I think that's what leads naturally to moments for innovation to occur. So I think it's about creating the right atmosphere and the right environment, and curiosity just breeds that naturally for me.
And then I guess the kind of the hope of the team, or the hope that you have by creating this culture of kind of openness and transparency and fairness, is that when they feel safe, that they can be truly authentic to themselves, that's when the magic kind of starts to come out.
Absolutely. For any of us who've been in sales roles before, admitting why you're struggling is, in many environments, like career suicide. And for me, that kind of comes back to, how would I wish I would be able to operate? I wish I would be able to ask those questions so I can actually get my deal closed, because that's better for me, that's better for my team, that's better for the company, that's better for my boss, it's better for all the things. And so I just wanted to strip away all the barriers and just not have anybody ever feel like that. And that's genuinely the underlying goal here, is to not have people feel like they can't ask anyone in the team, not just one-on-one come to enablement because they're the trusted advisor, or always having to go to their leader, because the leader is only finite in terms of their resource, but being able to create forums like an office hours where it's not just a push of information, it's a forum where you can genuinely say, how do I tackle this situation? Or has anybody else dealt with this new AI committee thing that's now a new thing in our industry? Are you seeing these additional procurement steps? And how are you dealing with the additional scrutiny on XYZ? And for people to be able to voice that question and actually get a response, and it not be perceived as being unable to do their job, that's so freeing in many ways. But it creates an environment where salespeople thrive and they're enjoying themselves, and they can get better outcomes, not just for themselves personally, professionally, within, and feeling happy within the work environment, because many sales environments are very challenging and highly pressurized and very stressful. So I just wanted to remove a little slice of the stress.
Yeah, it's so excellent. I kind of think about, I really love gardening, and oftentimes if a plant isn't doing very well, it's usually being crowded out, or it doesn't have the space to grow, or there's something over the top of it that's preventing the light getting to it. And as you're talking about kind of creating this culture where people can talk about where they are having problems, or what you might phrase that another way, where there are opportunities for growth or there are opportunities for learning. In a similar way, I'm thinking about just like something growing out the ground. Your job as a leader, I guess, is to keep that ground clear of any competition that might be keeping that growth down. It might be clearing what's above them, making sure that when they do grow, they can grow up and in the direction that they want to grow. And so I really love, I'd love to be on your team, I think. This idea that, if you can create the best growing medium and a great ecosystem for that person to grow in, you have no idea what their potential is, and you won't until you start cutting away any of this toxic type of existing sales culture, it sounds like you're referring to. So thank you so much for giving such a authentic answer and a really truthful answer. I wondered, this kind of leads us very nicely into key qualities of leadership. So I wondered if you could just share with us what you think key qualities are for successful leaders.
It's an interesting one. So studying different types of leaders, there are lots of different types. You've got the ones who are incredibly inspirational, who are visionaries, pioneers, incredibly exciting people and then you've got the other end of the spectrum, real pragmatists, very data-driven, scientific in terms of very hands-on and into the weeds with things. I think that the flavor that I enjoy the most and I resonate with most is the really human-centric leaders who actually will think about things and are able to translate them in ways that matter and resonate, no matter who or where you are in the organization. I think those leadership qualities really stand out for me. Quite young in my career, I worked at a great company called Lex Vehicle Leasing, and I had the opportunity to talk about a project that I've been working on. And the managing director of the company used to speak at the company all hands, which actually just happened in the canteen of the building because that was the biggest area. And I was booked an appointment with him, and I was very young, in my 20s, and you see an appointment with the MD. And what he wanted to talk to me about was what I was going to talk about in the employee all hands, because it's an important meeting in his mind. And I remember going into his office and being really petrified and having over-engineered and really thought about what I wanted to say. And genuinely, he really just wanted to help coach me so that I was effective in delivering a message in that environment. Because he knew that I was based in, I was young, I hadn't done public speaking before, I would be standing in the canteen, which is very echoey, trying to be heard. If you're being timid, would have been impossible. And so he just genuinely spent time coaching me on public speaking and tuning my messaging and how to keep it succinct and concise. And for someone so busy and so important in the business to spend time on someone like me, who was an absolute nobody in a huge company, was incredibly humbling, and just one of those moments that really changed my perception of leadership. And so it really comes back to being human in the workplace. I think those are the leadership qualities that really stand out. And when I say being human, being approachable, being energetic, being dependable, giving advice when it's needed, or coaching somebody to actually find the answer themselves, and still having fun and being fun about it. It doesn't mean you're being unprofessional. And I think those are the leadership qualities that I find inspiring, I gravitate to, and inspire me to be better.
The MD taking his time to just talk to you about the forum and the format is an incredible little story, isn't it? And it really makes me reflect on, I think, maybe one opportunity for improvement across leadership paths in general, which is, I think that everyone through their career is looking at the next job, right? Or they've just started their new job and they're looking at their job and like, what do I need to do? I think when you get to that layer of leadership, it's not just about what you do, it's how you do it. And how you do it can leave lasting impressions on people, maybe for their entire career. And it might not be that, it might be that story you've just told now is the first time you thought about it in years, or maybe it comes up frequently. And I think similarly, there might be negative examples of where someone has, demonstrated that to achieve an outcome, doing some things which maybe push against some your values or generic values, general people's values, regardless of having pushed against those, it still achieved the outcome. And I think that's maybe part of the reason why you get people who go up into leadership who end up with these more, values which go against some of the things that we've spoken about today, less people-centric, less human-centric, and more about that leader being able to perform their role. And I really love what you're saying here, because it is a reminder that when people start to step up into leadership roles, and even it doesn't even need to be leadership roles, right? I mean, it can even be just colleagues and peers. And it's all about culture, really. What we're talking about now is that those actions are what set the tone of, A, how everyone else should act, and then B, if you're in the leader, how people should act as they follow you up the chain, right? Because all leaders are eventually going to go, new leaders are going to come and fill their place. And I just love the idea that, maybe soon, if you haven't already, there might be a moment where there is someone who is junior, who's relatively new, that's going to get into a situation they're unfamiliar with, and you will have such a positive memory of someone just reaching out to you and saying, hey, let's just make sure you're okay with what's about to happen, from a genuine stance of care rather than concern that you're going to screw it up and everyone's going to laugh at you and all that sort of stuff. What a valuable thing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We're going to talk now about the fourth theme, which is mentorship, guiding and being guided. So how do you approach mentorship with people who are seeking guidance from you?
It's one of these things where actually during my career I have been part of launching mentor programs where there's been mentors and mentees. So that happened during my career while I was at GE again, going back there. And I had mentors while I was there who were incredibly instrumental in where I am today. One thing I learned is that there's no rule when it comes to mentors. You can have multiple, and different mentors work for different stages of your career. And sometimes it's good to actually have a subject matter expert mentor, and other times it's better to have. But at any stage in your career, people can help you. And I've been very proactive around finding mentors for different things. An example that I would give you of this is joining Salesforce. I found the transition from Click Software into Salesforce. It was a lot to deal with going into such an enormous company. And I actually reached out and got agreement to have a mentor who could actually specifically help me with this transition, who was senior but not my leader, and who had really good perspective on the different functions, and could give me an outside of the fishbowl view on things in a way that I could feel safe. And people did comment that I seem to have transitioned into Salesforce really successfully. There's a lot of my colleagues who are going through the same transition really struggled. And it's because I actually tackled it head on by having a mentor. Another example of this was I took on responsibility for product management. And so I reached out to somebody who I knew was absolutely fantastic at product management and asked her if she would be my mentor. And after leaving Salesforce, she moved on to another company and I moved on to another company. And even though we weren't working together anymore, we had worked together at Salesforce, and she agreed and helped me enormously to make great insights and inroads on projects that I was tackling on product management that she had great experience, and where I was struggling because they were new experiences for me. And I find that having mentors for specific purposes, and when that chapter comes to an end, transitioning or having that relationship come to an end is not a bad thing. And there was mutual gain for both parties in those scenarios. I was learning from them, but there's also things that I can help with and advise with. And so I wanted to feel like they were getting something back. And it isn't always like that. And when you ask a mentor to mentor you, you go in with your eyes open in those different situations. And I've always felt it's been an accelerator for me in transitions, in learning new skills, in just sometimes actually having a mentor that can help you with spending time and being regimented about thinking about your development and where you're at, and how to be appreciative of where you are right now, and be very realistic and articulate what you think are areas of development and not do that in a vacuum. Things like that have been incredibly useful for me, and where mentoring and coaching are synonymous for me in terms of how they've been accelerators for me.
I really love the concept of like mentor for the moment, like that kind of idea. Like, what moment are you in, and who should the mentor be, and what should they provide you with? And that you went out and you sought someone, you kind of identified in yourself that you have a need, and you looked outwards and said, okay, who can help me here? And I'm sure that was in part driven by a want to be productive quickly and to, start really earning the wage, rather than just being paid it. But also interesting because, we were speaking a little bit earlier about how in your day job, like day to day, you just get in there and you just get stuff done and you kind of work it out yourself. So it's really admirable that you have this clearly this ability to go, or to say, okay, here's the limit of my knowledge, or here is the limit of my ability, or whatever that is. And you have some sort of way of saying, okay, now I need help from someone. Now I need to do something. And it's all kind of building up this picture of your ideal culture, I think, which is everyone can just be open and honest and no one's going to judge. Just find out where the opportunities are for growth, where our problems are, and let's just get it all done so everyone can just move on and be great at what they do. And that's such a great message. And one of the things that you touched on was very, very lightly on almost being able to identify when a mentor isn't right for that moment, or that mentor isn't right for you. Do you have any experience of maybe having reached out to someone and then realizing, oh, actually, maybe this wasn't the right call, or vice versa? Maybe someone offered to mentor you, or asked you to be a mentor for them, and you were like, actually, this might not be right for whatever reason. Do you have any experience of that?
I do, actually. I reached out to somebody as part of a very generic mentoring program, and someone had ticked the box that they wanted to mentor, and I had ticked the box that I wanted a mentor. And I was really seeking just to get access to the pool of people who were in that mentor category. And so we were matched as mentor and mentee. And it was really just a very generic program. And because there wasn't specific intent, that was not successful. Because that person wasn't genuinely invested in helping me with a specific thing. They were doing it because it was part of a program, and they were then being perceived to be ticking the box in doing some mentoring. And so if there isn't a genuine want and a genuine need, and there isn't a mutual alignment between mentor and mentee, it's not successful. If it's just let's just talk generally, or let's have a connection point, or you want to maintain a connection, that's not really mentoring. I think for me, I feel that you can be specific, and then you have a common goal and you're both working towards it. It creates clarity, and it creates a mutual understanding of what the end goal looks like. And I think that is super helpful in getting a successful mentor-mentee relationship. So when you have the flip side, when it's generic, when it's non-goal oriented, and when it doesn't really when there isn't a natural coming together of the mentor-mentee for a specific purpose, that's when it didn't work for me.
So let's move on to the final theme, which is our conclusion. So in this theme, this is a kind of moment now for us to spend and think about everything we've spoken about over the whole recording of this podcast. Some of the things that you might have remembered today, this might be the first time you've remembered it since it happened. They might be recurring themes. But either way, you might be leaving the conversation today with some maybe different perspectives or renewed perspectives. So I wondered is there anything that we've spoken about today, like a particular insight or moment that stands out to you now as particularly meaningful or impactful?
I think meaningful and impactful moments in my career actually happened very young for me, when I was most impressionable. Reflecting back on that moment in the office with the MD and moments I had in my 20s when you're younger and more impressionable and green behind the ears, those moments and those interactions stay with you throughout your whole career. Just as when you're a child, the way in which you're brought up and the environment have a lasting impression, I do feel that when I reflect back, it's really been an eye-opener on those personalities, those leaders that you experience when you're young can have lasting impressions on what good looks like and what not good looks like. It's interesting because I talked to you about the MD, but I also had an incredibly interesting leader who led operations in the same company. I'd walk into his office and he'd actually say, "What the F do you want?" And when you're 20 and young, and the only female in the department, and he was incredibly aggressive and quite a personality, actually having the balls to stand my ground and even ask the question that I'd come in to ask was such a learning ground for me. And genuinely, deep down, he was a lovely guy, just absolutely scary when you're catching him at a bad moment. And it was understanding those different personalities and what they're like and how I reacted in those situations really shaped, I think, how I have developed longer term as a leader, because you have those experiences and know how they feel. And either you come away with actually thinking, well, that's just how the world of work works and that's how you should then emulate. But I always made a conscious decision to actually emulate the experiences that were good and to never do or emulate those experiences that weren't great further in my career. And coming back to those simple concepts of not wanting to be perceived as a ladder burner and treating people in a manner that I would want to be treated, I think have really been shaping moments for me in terms of how I've experienced those moments and how they've made me feel and how I want others to feel, because I do genuinely have empathy and care about wanting to have a great working environment. And when you can get on a call with somebody and genuinely feel comfortable to say whatever you need to say and not have to think politically and rephrase and invest calories into how you're going to come across and all those other things, you just feel this sense of freedom on being you and people accepting of that. And that's an environment that I think everybody would want. And I think it's the reflection back that helps me truly underline that I feel like I am in my career where I'm supposed to be right now. And purely all those experiences have shaped this sense that I have right now.
So people listening to you talk about the kind of open culture and the authenticity and the kind of lack of judgment, if people are listening to that critically, they might say, well, if you give everyone the ability to be free and to kind of be whoever they want to be and do whatever they want to do, then you do run the risk of ending up with a team of people who are just too individual and they're almost kind of siloed. I don't particularly think that would be a concern for me, but I could see how other people might look at that and go, it's a bit too it's a bit too light. It's a bit too light touch. Things need to be a lot closer and tighter, and everyone needs to be driving to the same goal and all this kind of thing. So how do you, when you're in that kind of culture setting, when you're in that culture setting mode, how do you ensure that people don't grow too wildly off into another direction? So people, how do you foster a culture that enables people to be authentic to themselves and true, whilst also ensures that they do pull towards the same goal?
It's interesting. So I think as a manager of a day-to-day in terms of people's work and also about leadership, I think it touches on the two sides of this coin for me, that question, because you want to be inspirational in how you drive people to want to be the best of themselves and deliver great work. But also when you sense that slight variation from the true north, that's when I think you flip into more of a managerial mode, and you need to have conversations to coach people around what you're thinking, why you're thinking that, and give them the space to help you understand what they're doing. And you may need to have conversations on helping them understand why that's not the best course of action, and actually recenter them towards the north. And so I think there are moments when you need to have those coaching moments and have those conversations and get underneath the motivations, because sometimes what you see is as a result of something else, and it's the perception of the communication that you gave and how it was interpreted and then acted upon. And quite often you just need to get to the underlying root cause, or just to explore what's motivating behind that, because sometimes people will naturally gravitate to spending time doing what they enjoy, and maybe what they're enjoying doing isn't quite in alignment with what you want them to be doing. And understanding that is something in itself, because if they don't want to spend time doing on stuff that is really core, then how can you address that together, being open and honest about it? How do we share that and still get the outcome that's best for the business, or address it? And does somebody have to suck it up and do the stuff they don't want to do, or how are we going to work on it together? But sharing a problem is always step one, and talking about it, and you get there with it. So I don't find that I end up in a state of anarchy. Sometimes things get a little bit out of hand. Of course, that's a consequence, but it's always worth it.
Thank you. Let's enjoy the last question of the day, shall we? What do you hope that people take from today's conversation that we've had, both in terms of what do you hope that they remember about your unique journey, and also what do you hope that the listeners or the audience take away as kind of key messages from our conversation today?
I hope people take away that each of us is having an impact on other people, and it's a ricochet impact. It's like when you see that pebble skittering along the surface of the water, we all create ripples that have an impact. And the way in which we interact with each other, when you're having a bad day, being able to present your best self is even more critically important for you to invest energy in that, because you having a negative conversation with somebody will result in them having a negative conversation with somebody, will result in them having another negative conversation, and there is a ripple impact. And all of us can choose, and it is a choice, whether you present your best self and you feel proud when you close your laptop at the end of the day that it was your best self that interacted with people, or it wasn't. And that's a decision that you make, whether you're going to be fair or unfair, whether you're going to be secretive or you're going to be truthful, and all of these things are conscious decisions. And I want people to take that away, that you're in control of that. And what you do has impact on others, and it's not just about you. And it's about the us, the we, and the team. And that's what work and being in professional settings is actually really about. It's not all about you, and it's not all about the I. And it's about the sense of we and us that is actually incredibly much more fulfilling, I've found, in my career. So that was kind of part one. What do I want people to remember or take away is that sometimes we're so focused on where we're going and where we want to be that we don't actually enjoy where we are right now, and we don't reflect on how much we've achieved. And today's conversation is just such an eye-opener that I've had an incredibly unique and fulfilling journey. I'm very, very appreciative of all the experiences, good and bad, because they have shaped who I am in many ways. And so I think that for me is kind of where I'd like people to kind of finish, that sometimes just take a pause, just take a moment and think about all the boxes you've ticked and not all the ones that you haven't.
And come on this podcast and I can force the moment for them. That's great. Thank you, Tas. It's been so great to listen to you and to your perspective. Thank you so much again for sharing it. I'm glad to have facilitated that realization for you.
Yeah, and for you for thinking of me. I mean, it's just a pleasure. I think it's a real testament to what I really talked about. We could have been just, like sliding doors, passing ships in our careers, and here we are. And thank you so much for thinking of me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Mentor Collective podcast. If you enjoyed it, you're welcome to subscribe. You're also welcome to go to our website, thementorcollective.net, to find out about the other good work we do in mentorship. Wherever you are, I hope you have a great rest of your day.